الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Alhamdulillah, الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. Allah says, talking about the people of paradise, that they say all praise belongs to you, Allah, who guided us to this, and had it not been for your guidance, we would not be guided. Big welcome to Edinburgh Central Mosque. Thanks everyone for coming. It's a big turnout for a Sunday morning, mashallah. Very happy to see this number of people, and you were definitely in for a treat. We were in Glasgow last night. A really beautiful session with Joram last night, and I'm sure it will be just as good. First of all, thank you very much for being here. Joram, he's come from Holland. You probably read something about his you probably wouldn't be here if you didn't know anything about him. He's pulled the crowd, so to speak. But as you know, we'll hear inshallah a lot from his own words about his background. He comes from a Dutch Protestant background. He's actually quite a strict religious background. He ended up entering into politics and local government and kind of national government. Was very much influenced by this anti-Muslim kind of rhetoric that is a feature of European politics and has been in recent years. He was a member of the Dutch Parliament and the Party for Freedom, the Freedom Party of Geert Wilders. Forgive me if my Dutch isn't.
That's great.
Who is renowned for his stance against Islam, and Joram was actually very active in that kind of effort of trying to repress Islam, or trying to reduce the influence of Islam on Dutch society. And he upon leaving, he left his position in Parliament and wanted to write a book, in a sense, as a refutation or addressing or bring some arguments about how dangerous Islam is and how harmful Islam is. And in the process of writing that book, he began to have a change of heart, and he began to start to see things in this religion which was seemed which he was so hostile to, and that led to his journey towards Islam, and eventually becoming Muslim, and completely changing his life and changing his path, and all that entailed for his journey. And that he's obviously, as all of us, we're all on a journey. His journey is still ongoing, and we're looking forward to hearing more about that. Big thank you to Naeem from Islamic Studies Trust, and Showkit, the brothers who very kindly allowed us to bring him to Edinburgh. He wasn't originally planning to come, but we decided to make use of him while he's here. We'll just kind of make it as a kind of conversation, and then we'll open the floor for people to ask questions. So maybe we could just start by just saying a little bit about your background and family background and where you come from, and yeah.
Okay. Oh, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a big honor for me to be here in Scotland and with you as a Muslim community in Edinburgh.
We can't see you. Can you stand up?
No, I think he's...
You only need to hear him, not see him.
Come. Bring a seat.
Not only for me, for everybody. You can stand up. Not only for me, for everybody.
We're not actually. It's not in the form of a lecture. It's more of a conversation. Inshallah, more people to relax, including our speaker.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you very much again. And it's a great honor to meet you as well in person. I've heard about you, and it's remarkable that I'm sitting right here with you right now here. Well, you introduced me a little bit already. So yeah, I am Joram van Klaveren. I was a former member of the Dutch Parliament and a representative for the Party for Freedom. The sound isn't working.
Can you?
Can you hear me when I talk like that?
Yes. Yes.
I don't know the people about it. Maybe it's just
In the politician.
you can hold that close.
Okay, perhaps it's better. Thanks. Yeah, so I was brought up in a pretty strict Protestant environment. Especially the theology was very strict. It wasn't like my parents told me, well, you have to hate persons or whatever. But I was kind of a nerdy guy, so I loved to read books. And I was very much interested in Christianity because, of course, I was a Christian and practicing Christian, or from a Christian family. So one of the persons I was very much interested in was Martin Luther. And that was not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther from the 16th century, the guy who started the Reformation in 1517. And of course, I took knowledge from the books he wrote. And he wrote a lot about Christianity, of course, but he also wrote about Islam. So it was the first time that I saw a scholar, a Christian scholar. Of course, it's way back. But what he wrote about Islam, how he wrote about Islam, and why. And he was very negative, but it has to do with the context, of course, as well, because back then there was, like great tension between the Ottoman Empire, Turkey, big Turkey back then. It's still big, but it's much bigger than. And Europe. And there was this clash between the Christians, so to say, Europe and the Ottoman Empire that lasted for years and years and years. So that shaped, of course, his views and indirectly my views. So there was something that was always in the back of my mind when I started to learn more about Islam as a youngster. After high school and college, I went to the university. I studied comparative religion. But the first day of me being a student of comparative religion was September 11, 2001. So I already had some like a negative bias towards Islam. But then, of course, I saw these guys flying planes into buildings and killing people. So I thought to myself, well, they're even more crazier than I thought. And then a few years after that, there was a famous filmmaker in the Netherlands. His name was Theo van Gogh. There's that's now an exposition, I think, and that is his grandfather. Yeah, Van Gogh, the painter. Yeah, his family. Yeah, but he was killed because he made a movie that it was a very insulting movie. But of course, yeah, there's no need to kill anybody over a movie you don't like. But he was killed, and it was done by a guy who called himself a jihadi, and he said, "I did it for Islam and because of Islam, etc." So I thought, and it was 2 blocks away from my old house. So I thought, first, I already had these negative feelings because of my upbringing in a way, especially in the theological sense. Then, of course, we saw 9/11. Then Theo van Gogh was murdered, and then all of a sudden, this whole terrorism thing started in Europe with Beslan, in Russia, then Spain, London, Madrid, everywhere. So I thought to myself, what can I do to protect the country and the West against this evil ideology called Islam? And then I thought, well, I have to go into politics because it's the most effective way, then I can change the law. So that's what I did, and I was pretty much into it. So I ended up being a member of parliament in the Netherlands for the Freedom Party, and because I studied comparative religion, and Geert Wilders, of course, was very anti-Islam as well. You can be the spokesperson on the topic of Islam and integration and stuff like that. So that's what I did, and I was very extreme. Up to the point that we tried to ban the Quran from the Netherlands, we tried to shut down all Islamic schools, forbid mosques, everything. But in 2014 I left the party because we got into like an argument about the Moroccan people. Because there was this rally in 2014 and we had, there were elections for municipalities, and he was in his district in The Hague, and I was in my own district, and I was in Almere, someplace else. And all of a sudden I heard him on television say, "Do you want more or less Moroccans in the Netherlands?" So that's what he asked the people in the rally, and all the people are shouting less, less, less. So he said, well, I'll make that happen. So, and of course I was the spokesman not only on Islam but also integration. So next day I asked him, what's this? Is this something new? Because of course I hated Islam, but it wasn't necessarily that I hated Moroccan people. So I told him, and a lot of people don't know, there worked a lot of people from Turkish, Moroccan, etc. backgrounds for the Freedom Party. And they were all, of course, ex-Muslims, so they were very fanatic. Some were Christian or Jewish, or no practicing Muslims, of course, but they were, of course, in an ethnic sense, also Moroccan. So I thought it was kind of a betrayal of your own people fighting Islam, and it doesn't matter where they're from. But he said, well, this is it, and this is the story you have to sell. So yeah, well, I'm not going to sell that story because I'm pretty much anti-Islam, of course, but this has nothing to do with Islam anymore. If you say it in general, we said, yeah, well, this is it, and then we got into a little fight, and I said, well, then I'll leave. And he said, well, I don't think you will leave, but I did. And then, of course, but I was still in Parliament, so from 2010 till in the end 2017. And in 2014 I started writing my book, and I thought, well, this is my opportunity. I had so to say, a long-held desire to write an anti-Islam book. And why? Because in politics you always have the one-liners. It's very simple, very
Attractive.
yeah, very superficial when you want to talk about certain important policies and stuff, but you never get into the core, into really deep. So I thought to myself, well, I can write a book. Then I can explain why we think Islam is such a danger for not only for the Netherlands but also for the West and for the whole wide world. But while writing the book, some questions I had as a youngster popped up again, and those were theological questions, and not so much about politics, because a lot of people, when they read my book, they think it's a book from, so to say, the lab of Geert Wilders, and I rolled into the mosque a few days later. But that's not how it went, of course. Because for me it was like a religious journey.
That's what I was going to ask you, actually. Maybe sorry to cut you off, but did you see it as, because you talked about having quite a strong religious background, and did you see it as a kind of religious? You see it as a religious duty, as almost like a crusade to kind of to defend your country from this invasion? Because you mentioned yesterday, Wilders himself was not religious at all. But you yourself saw it as a religious duty to do that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, because a lot of people think it's a political thing, but for me, because I was a believing Christian, I thought it's not only about politics. In the essence, it's about the world and the truth. And I thought this evil cult called Islam is a danger for the West, so I have to do something to stop it. And I did it, of course, because I was a Christian and I was motivated by that. And that's why I asked Wilders, do you believe in God? And I asked him because I don't know if people were there yesterday, so I'll repeat it.
Assume no one was there yesterday.
Okay. Well,
one or two.
at a certain point, because in the West, and I don't know, because we met like Tommy Robinson and so the people like that. There's this whole network, so to say, of people knowing each other, helping each other, promoting each other, etc. So when Tommy Robinson a few years ago, he went into prison for something, I don't know exactly what it was, but in the end, Geert Wilders came to London, I think, and there was this whole protest thing going on, and then they repeated the thing that they always repeat: Islam is alien to the West, etc., etc. And they, in combination with that, they say, well, we are the defenders of Christian heritage. We are the defenders of Christianity. So at one time, I asked Geert Wilders, do you believe in God? Because I never heard him talk about God when we were talking to each other or whatever. There were no religious talks. So I thought to myself, well, if we are the defenders of Christianity, the least thing is that we believe in God. But he said to me, why do you want to know? And then I explained, well, we are the defenders of Christianity, the Christian heritage, etc., etc. So, do you believe in God? And he said, well, I was baptized as a Catholic, but that's it. But then we had, but do you believe? And he said, well, I don't know. So someone else said, so you're an agnostic then? And he said, what? And he didn't know what an agnostic was. So in the end he said, well, let's go back to work now. It was fun, and then that was it. That was the only thing. But I thought to myself, that was kind of like a disillusion. Is that a word? Yeah. So I thought to myself, how is that possible? And there's this other guy, a new kid on the block in the Netherlands called Baudet, and he is less into the anti-Islam thing, but he also says he is the defender of Christianity and the defender of Christian heritage. But he explicitly said on television, I don't believe in God. It's a fairy tale. But how can you be a defender of something you don't believe in? So we now have two guys fighting for Christian heritage and Christianity who don't believe in God. So that was, it was very strange.
And that's kind of a common theme, I think, across these right-wing movements across Europe, saying that we're defending this, defending our values and defending Christianity, and it's very vague what those values are and what the Christianity is, if they don't even subscribe to themselves. And so perhaps you're in a minority in the sense of actually truly feeling that you were defending Christian values, and.
No, that is the case, because yesterday I mentioned a report done by the Dutch government not too long ago. And it's called "Outside the Mosque, Outside the Church." That's the title, and it's about the coming decades. And the theme is secularization, and what will secularization do with society? And so because it's like unique experiment in a way, because there has never been a society that voluntarily wants to leave religion. Because if you have, for example, the USSR, the Soviet Union back then, where you could not be a Christian or a Muslim because the government was atheist and said you cannot believe, it's something stupid. But now we see for the first time that there is people in the West that says, well, we're not religious anymore, but without someone pressuring them into atheism. But of course there are still some groups that are practicing believers, and in the report they mentioned the Orthodox Protestant club and the Muslims, and I say, well, they will have a hard time because all their values when it comes to family or just believing in God, wanting to dress modest, stuff like that, there will be more strange every year. And then of course, because most of the people became secular and their values become liberal, then you get into these situations where you're both reasoning from a whole other perspective, and I think that will be an issue not only in the Netherlands or here, but I think in the whole right West.
I mean, because I come from a Protestant background myself, but very the religion isn't emphasized. It's very liberal. It's very laid back. It's kind of. The church that I go to has now got a gay bishop, a gay priest. It's this constant kind of moral, decline, if you want to say, or the values are always changing. But it's interesting. You come from a kind of a background which was, holding on to those values in a sense, and seeing themselves as defending Christianity or really subscribing to Christianity and not compromising.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because most of the time when I go to a secular audience or people who really don't believe in God or left God, because there are a lot of ex-Christians, ex-Muslims, they always say, isn't it hard in the family when you became Muslim? And of course, I had my issues, and I still have my issues, but it wasn't about the values. It wasn't that they say, well, it's ridiculous that you believe in God, for example. And I can imagine if you're from a very secular background and you all of a sudden believe in something that your family says it doesn't exist, that's perhaps even harder. But with me it was more like they said Islam is a false religion. So that makes it different, and it's very deep, because people who are religious, of course, that's the central point in your life. That's who you are, what you want to be, why you are here, etc. So then for them, it's like you choose. That's what my mother did. She cried when I became Muslim, and it's not because she said, "Well, I didn't want you to be Muslim, but I hate the fact that you left Christianity," and not in a cultural sense. But she said, "Well, you're lost now. So of course that's like, in a way it's very sweet that you cry for the soul of someone else.
Yeah. Maybe you could talk more about the rest, just your family reaction.
Yeah, well, but that was my mother's reaction, of course. There were some uncles, some other people, some friends, old colleagues, etc. who really said, well, we're not talking to you anymore, to us you're dead, so that's over. So some of them I really don't speak anymore to, but that's most of the people were not very enthusiastic. Some did. I have to say, for example, my brother was very laid back, so to say. He said, "Well, yeah, I understand." So, and I thought, well, I thought he was one of the persons that wouldn't understand. But he said, "Oh, I understand. That sounds logical." That's it. So that was kind of a relief. But like I told yesterday,
tell them about your grandfather.
The hardest thing for me was to share the story with my grandfather, because my grandfather was a very religious Christian person, and we were from, like said, from a kind of old school family. So my grandfather was at the top, like an Italian pyramid. Maybe like some Muslim families, there is that kind of patriarch, and there's that respect for the elders, and so maybe it's similar to that. I think so, yeah. So my grandfather was in a way the boss of the family, and it's went down. So when my grandfather was very old, he was 93 years old, and he was literally lying on his deathbed. And then, of course, everybody came by to say, pay less respect, etc. And my mother, brother, sister, everyone came by. But of course, then there was me. And I had to tell my grandfather before that, well, by the way, I left the religion. So it felt very hard to do, and I didn't want to make him sad, but yeah, of course I had to tell him, because I wanted to be honest and I wanted to know him, what I did. So I asked my mother, can you come with me and be
hold your hand?
Yeah, in a way, like a shield. So I was standing there, and she said, well, get on with it. So I told him, yes, I became Muslim, and then he closed his eyes. And he stopped breathing. And of course, when people are under deathbed, sometimes they stop breathing, and then all of a sudden they start breathing again. But we thought, well, what happened? They said, oh, you killed him. But then,
final words.
But then he started breathing again, and he looked at me and he said, well, at least you didn't become a Catholic. And of course, I know it's sensitive here, especially since yesterday with something. But of course, it was in a way his way of saying you're still welcome. And why? Because I don't know if it's interesting to share that story as well. Well, in the 16th century, the Netherlands was like a colony of Spain. And we have a very strange national anthem. In the national anthem, we sing, "We are from German blood, and we honor the King of Spain." So that's our national anthem, and we're Dutch. So it's kind of strange,
Sorry
but
to interrupt. It's possible to raise the volume just a little.
Okay.
Like over here, it's difficult to touch the wheels.
Okay.
is it better like this?
Keep talking.
Yeah, is it better like this? Okay, sorry. Well, like I said, the Netherlands used to be a colony of Spain in the 16th century. Spain, of course, was Catholic, and they pushed Catholicism, of course, because that was the main religion in Spain. But William of Orange, that was, so to say, the founding father of the Netherlands. That's why we always have this orange shirt when we play football. And William of Orange, he said, I want to be a Protestant, because we had this Reformation. I just talked about in 1517, there was this guy, Martin Luther, who started the Reformation. So like, he split from the Catholic Church, and he said, well, we still believe in God and the Bible, but we don't want to have statues, we don't want to have a Pope, etc. So it was more the Islamic way of Christianity. But in 1588, so a few decades later, he said he wanted to be a Protestant as well. But of course, the King of Spain said, well, that's not going to happen. We're a Catholic empire, so you're a Catholic person. And he said, well, I'm not. They got into a fight, and in the end, this war started, and it took about 80 years. We call it the 80 Years' War. And that was our, like, so to say, the independence war of the Netherlands. And the Netherlands, the north of the Protestant, because the south is still Catholic in the Netherlands, so we have still this division in a way. Of course, most people are secularized, so they don't do anything. But you see it when they're celebrating Carnival, for example. In the south, there's Carnival, in the north, there's no Carnival, because the south was Catholic, the north not. But in the end, to come back to the story, William of Orange said, well, we're losing, and we're probably all gonna die. But so we have to do something to make sure that we will survive and that we will beat the Spanish. And then he said, well, what can I do? So he wrote a letter to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And he said, can you help me? Because the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So, and we are the enemy of your enemy, so we are your friends. And the Ottoman Sultan said, well, what's in it for us, right? They said, well, we are in a strategic, interesting place. If you go with your ships, you can do stuff here in the Netherlands. Said, well, okay, that's good. So he did it. He gave money, he gave some weapons, and they started to fight with the help of the Ottomans, in a sense. And the Netherlands won, so they became independent. And every year, and it's still up to this exception because of Corona, but normally there was this festival. It's called Leidens Ontzet. It means the liberation of Leiden. It's a big city in the Netherlands. And then people used to wear crescent moons on their shirt because of Islam, because of the help of the Ottoman Empire, because their flag had 3 white moons and a red background. And they used to sing, I'd rather be I'd rather be Turkish than Papish. And that means, if you translate it into modern day English, I'd rather be a Muslim than a Catholic. And that string, of course, because back then everybody thought like that, but most of the people split it away in a theological sense, but my church didn't. So when my grandfather told me, well, at least you didn't become Catholic, he meant Muslims or Islam is nearer to my way of thinking, my religion, Christianity in the Protestant sense of the word, than Catholicism. So that was the story.
Right. And then he said, what was the final thing that he said?
Yeah, of course, yeah, that's another thing. We used to talk about about a lot of things, because my grandfather was a very wise man. He knew a lot, and he read a lot, etc. So we often talk about life, death, beauty, family, politics, football, all important things in life. So one day, and it was the last conversation I had with him, we talked about beauty and relation to religion and God. So I asked him, what do you think beauty is? And he said, well, if you look at it from a religious point of view, he said to me, beauty is like living as if you see God, and if you are not able to do that, live as if God sees you. And that was the last thing we talked about. And I didn't know, a few months later I discovered this hadith from Bukhari, where almost the same thing is mentioned, that if you what is ihsan. So yeah, I was very touched by the fact that the last thing my very Christian grandfather told me on his deathbed was this from Bukhari.
Beautiful final words. A beautiful thing you said yesterday, which I really kind of touched me, was on your journey to Islam. You talked about the heart and the mind coming together, the kind of rationally understanding that this is truth, and also then the heart feeling and kind of your emotions kind of coming together. Maybe you could just talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, much better.
Just hold it.
Well, like I said, when I was younger, like 16, 17 years old, the first time you doubt certain things in the world, of course, how you are raised. You think, well, if I get children, I'll do it better, of course, like everybody does and things. But also in a theological sense. a theological sense of the word, I started doubting, for example, the Trinity of Christ, of the Trinity of God. I didn't really understood how can God be a man, because in Christianity we believed, or they still believe, that you have God the Father, God the Son, Isa or Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And those three are one in essence, but three separate persons. But I always thought, well, it's kind of strange, because when I read the New Testament, the Bible, part 2 of the Bible, so to say, then we see Jesus praying to God, and he asks him for strength, and he asks a lot of things. And I thought to myself, well, if you are God, who are you talking to then? Because you're not talking to yourself. And another thing was that, especially in the Protestant tradition, they say the only way to salvation, to paradise, to heaven, is believing in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. If you don't believe that, well, you go to hell. And when I was younger, I asked some preachers, how is it possible that if you are, for example, thinking of people like Noah, or people like Abraham, or Moses, are those people in hell? And they said, no, of course not. You cannot ask questions like that. That's ridiculous. And I thought, I told them, well, if the only way to salvation is believing in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ, then those people should be in hell, because they didn't believe that, because Jesus wasn't even born yet. And they said, no, of course not. They are in heaven. So I thought to myself, so there are two ways now, because they entered paradise in a way, and we are able to enter paradise in this way. So I didn't thought it was very logical. Sorry.
Well, when I was writing my book, like I told earlier, the questions I had back then as a 16, 17-year-old, I put them away in a sense, and I just went on being a Christian till I started writing this book. Those questions popped up again. And then after I embraced Islam, I thought that was the first time that I felt that what I wanted to believe was the same thing that what I could believe. Because as a Christian, I wanted to believe, of course, the whole narrative of Christianity, because I was a Christian person and I really believed it. But in a way, in a rational way, I couldn't, because of the examples I just mentioned. But when I became Muslim, I thought, yeah, this is the first time that I see this direct relationship with the Creator. There is no, like, so to say, almost mathematical concept of God. So I wanted to believe, and I could believe, but I also rationally could accept the fact that this is it. So it was for the first time that heart and mind became one. So, and that gave a lot of peace of mind, but also peace of heart. So yeah, that made you a much happier person in a way.
And I mean, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of humility to come out and say you're wrong, basically. And especially when you've been in the public and you've been seen as a figurehead and you're seen as a spokesman. I mean, did you ever think, well, I can just quietly just cover this up and not go public with it? Just it must have taken a lot of it was a big step to actually publicly come out and say this is what I believe. How did you kind of do that? Was there a temptation just to keep quiet and just have a private, kind of secret? Because there's a lot of secret Muslims out there. They're sometimes called submarines. They're in their careers or they're in their places of education, or and they don't openly come out and say they're Muslim, but they for fear of whatever's going to happen, they don't openly say they're Muslim. So was that an option for you, or did you feel I have to kind of be public with this?
It's true what you say, and there are a few what they call submarines in the Netherlands as well. I know them, even in politics.
Okay, well.
So, but it's of course dangerous for their social status and their career. So a lot of them, I don't think, will speak up. Perhaps later, and you never know. But of course, there was something my mother mentioned. She said, well, of course, if you are a Muslim, be a Muslim, but just don't share it. And in the beginning I thought, well, perhaps that's an option. But then again, I thought to myself, well, if I want to pray, of course you have to go to a mosque. And if all of a sudden this extreme right, anti-Muslim politician comes in, or the police will shoot me because they think I'll do something there, or people will get scared or scream or hit me or whatever. So I thought this kind of, it's impossible. And of course you want to just do the things you do. And if you start talking in a certain way about Islam in this, yeah, of course people will notice. So I thought to myself, that's impossible to do. You want to practice what you preach. So that's what it wasn't a real option. But of course, like what you said, it isn't the best thing, the best experience for your ego, because
it's great for ego.
Oh yeah, you look very stupid, of course, because especially if you're so vocal, so extreme, and out in the open, and then it's okay, I was wrong, and yeah, so yeah, it doesn't feel real good. I can share that.
That's an amazing thing in and of itself, to actually have the humility to say, stand up and say, I'm wrong. I think that's something we can all admire. Not everyone would be as brave to have to do that publicly.
Well, it's not all brave for you.
But even those threats on your life and things like that.
Yeah, that's true. But of course, I think almost all politicians get death threats now, unfortunately. So if you don't get any, you're not doing a good job. No, but yeah, it's a sad thing. No, but in my case, it was almost impossible, of course, because I was writing this anti-Islam book. So when I had to change, so to say, from publishing house as well. Because in the beginning, and that's a funny story, I wanted to write this anti-Islam book, so I was looking for some publishing houses that could do this. And I had some, I talked to some, but in the end, of course, it started changing into this personal search for God. So I thought to myself, well, I have to check and see if there are other publishing houses. And I wanted them still to be kind of anti-Islam, or at least being very critical of, how do you call it? Critical, yeah. Okay. So, and I typed in Google, I said, well, and I searched for this publishing house, and I found in Dutch we call it kennishuis, it means house of wisdom. But it was written in the old school way, and in Old Dutch, and most of the Old Dutch that is used are from extreme right organizations, not like you see the Gothic way of where football hooligans use it all the time. So I thought, oh, that's a good thing. So I did it, and I made an appointment. But when I came there was this Muslim guy sitting in front of me. I said, "Are you from the kennishuis?" He says, "Yes, I'm from the House of Wisdom." I said, "Why would you write it like this?" He said, "Well, it's the House of Wisdom." Oh, no, that's oh, of course. So later on, yeah, some people said, "Oh, that's the hand of Google."
Something we didn't touch on yesterday, which I wanted to hear before we open the floor, inshallah, to questions, was what you're doing now with what your kind of efforts are, and how your outreach is now, how you're serving the community in Holland and beyond.
Yeah, well, I work as a policy advisor, but what we did.
So still a governmental thing?
Yeah, it's like you advise.
Civil servant.
Yeah, like something like that. But what we did, and that's the main thing that we do, and I think the most important thing I've done most of the time, that's we founded an organization called IslamExperience.com, the Experience Center, Islam Experience Center, and what we do is that we go around the country with these things, it's virtual reality glasses, and we let other people make VR movie, so virtual reality, and that's what we do now. So we go to primary schools, high schools, universities, even to some departments of government, and then we have this guest lesson. It's like a whole fixed concept. So first we ask people, what do you associate with Islam? It doesn't matter, there's no right or wrong, so you can say anything from terrorism, blood, whatever, till the best religion ever, and the most beautiful mosque, whatever, it doesn't matter. So that's what we do. We just have a warming up session. So we write these things on the board, or we just remember it. Then we go and look at the VR, and the VR is like a trip. It's just 7 minutes, but you go, it's like a journey to history. So you first get introduced in the House of Wisdom, by the way, to the Quran. People explain what is the Quran, why is it important for Muslims, what is the Kaaba, what's the Qibla, who is Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and all the basic information, so to say. And then you go to the next phase in this, the next stage in the video. You are in Mecca. And it's not the Mecca of nowadays with the high buildings and all the fancy stuff, but just old school Mecca. So you have a desert, you have palm trees, you see a market, and you see the Kaaba. And then in front of the Kaaba there is this person, everybody knows him of course, Bilal, and he sits there, and this old man, because we have a guide in this video, he says, well, you cannot really see him, but they say, well, that's Bilal, and you see people sitting in front of him, and then you hear him talk, and he explains, he gives you some surahs of the Quran, he explains it, and the old man, your guide, he says, well, do you understand? And of course you cannot say anything bad, but and then after that it becomes night, and you see a very big moon and all stars and stuff like that, and the old man starts explaining to you it's not only religion and the relationship you have with your creator, but it's also the influence on society, and in a big way in empires and civilizations. And then you see all these inventions in like holograms coming by, for example, universities, the camera, all these inventions that have been there done by Muslims in the golden age of Islam. And in the last stage, you're back in your living room, because that's where you start, and that's the first stage. You're looking at television, you see all these things happen, 9/11, Donald Trump saying we don't want Muslims in the United States, blah, blah, blah. And the last stage is that you're back in your chair, and then it's like you had a dream, because you start winking, and then it's over. And then after the video, of course, we go back to the board, and we ask the people, the participants in this guest lesson, how is it possible that what we've just seen, how Muslims see Islam? Because it's a very, what we call an inside perspective. Because this is what Muslims see, this is how Muslims teach each other, etc. But this is not what you see something else. Otherwise, there weren't words like blood and terrorism on the board right now. So that's what we do. And then we've noticed that, and we did a little research that was done by an external company, because we wanted to know is it effective, otherwise we can do something else. And they said over 72% of the people change their views on Islam. And sometimes, because we sometimes ask people, can you write something down? They say, well, I don't think Muslims are okay now, but I do think Islam is okay. Well, that's step one, so that's nice.
That's amazing, really amazing, very inspiring to hear that. And when can we get these headsets?
Well, you can see, we translated one for you in English,
oh, brilliant.
So you can just look at it if you want to. If you go to the website islamexperience.com, you can see, we now, but it's still in the development stage.
Yeah.
We offer, so to say, a sort of kind of a dawah package. So you can do it, and there's this Wi-Fi is included, so you can go into the desert or whatever, because it's GPS style, so you can do it everywhere. And it's funny, because we have one set we sent to New Zealand, and they had bought like a big fan. It's a fan, like a car, and they inside a van, and inside they built a classroom. So you can have 20 persons there, and they drive around New Zealand with this thing, and they do this like a mobile dawah center.
That's amazing, amazing. That's so inspiring to especially, what kind of age are the children aimed at? Yeah,
most of the children are 12 up, because otherwise we've done it with very young children in the beginning, like from 6, 7 years old, but they got a little scary sometimes. They get scared because
it's too real.
Yeah, well, if you've never done virtual reality is like you are really in another reality. So everything around you, it's 360 experience. When you look above, side, wherever you look, you're somewhere else. And of course you have a headset on, so you really are somewhere else. Because and that's why the young children sometimes get scared, because they say, well, I don't have feet anymore. Where is everybody? So. And we've done it we've been to a nursing home as well, and there was remarkable to see that they had exactly the same reaction as the young children, because they both never experienced something like that. So the older men and women said, "Whoa, what's this? Am I still here?" So
that's the fitra. The fitra is to be, the young children are still on the fitra, and older people are maybe closer to that natural state where technology is still, as we become kind of numb to technology. But that's an amazing. I'm really inspired by that. And I mean, if we could just, when we think about resources, how much money we spend as a Muslim community on certain projects and on, imagine focusing on a project like that that can change, people's perception, change children's perception. We have, alhamdulillah, we have children coming and visiting this mosque, and we have a very positive experience. But something like that is just taking it to another level where they can actually almost just completely rethink things and be exposed to that. I'm really inspired by that.
Yeah, and what we did in the beginning, we didn't go to Muslim schools. Because in the Netherlands it's a little different than compared to, I think, most countries. It's a kind of strange thing, because I just told you, the majority in the Netherlands is secular, atheist now. But almost all schools are religious. So most of them, that's what I'm saying, we have over 6,000 schools, and let's say 65% is Catholic or Protestant, and then you have some other schools, and you have a minority of schools is public, and it's all paid by the state, so you can do your thing. But we went to more to the public schools in the beginning, and we just skipped the Islamic schools. Why? Because we thought, well, they're already Muslim, we don't have to share it. So we want to reach out to people who really don't know anything yet. And we still have the focus on non-Muslims, because of course that's but we now also go to Muslim schools. And why is that? Because when we went to public schools, of course there are Muslims on public schools as well, and most of the questions we got from class were from Muslims, but those weren't really like thick questions or something, or deep stuff. It was more like, why? What can I say that I believe in God? How can I explain why I believe in God? Really basic stuff. Or people said, why is it that men and women have a different role? And all these things. They said, well, we cannot explain it. We cannot tell them, and then we feel stupid, or people, or I think, well, I don't talk about it at all. So with this, we try to boost the iman in a way. And also what we say to the Muslim teachers is that it's very important that you start talking about these questions, because most of the times when children have doubts, they say, well, you cannot doubt this or that, and people get scared in a way. But we say, well, it's good to have doubts. It's like you have questions. It's a bad thing if you stop there. But if the answers are there, but there has to be someone that gives you the answers. And we say, well, because you will be going to another secular environment, it's important that you have this baggage, so to say, that you can explain who you are, that you don't feel insecure, and that's very important.
That's very important. It's something something we should be honest about in the Muslim community as well. Is that young people do have doubts and they do have questions, and we can't just shut them down and say this is what we believe, and just believe, and we should welcome those questions. And I was just thinking, it's such a paradox that, like, a country like the Netherlands, which prides itself on this liberalism of being very progressive and legalizing drugs and everything is so unable to accept something like Islam, where there's a paradox between being liberal and being accepting and having that freedom, and then at the same time not applying that across the board to other freedoms, other religious freedoms.
Yeah, I think there's a problem in the whole West, of course, because I think it has to do with secular liberalism, because people don't believe in God, so they really don't understand religion. So the acceptance of religious people and religious beliefs is declining, and because they say, well, we don't believe in God, we think it's a fairy tale or whatever, and you hear them, and we have our freedom. And the combination of this freedom...
The party was called the Freedom Party.
It's called the Freedom Party, and they said, no Islam is freedom. That was really like a slogan almost. So, but of course it's true, it's a big paradox that you say, well, we are a free and open society, but only if you have certain opinions, otherwise you're an outcast. And I think that's a problem. So that's why I always say it's very important for Muslims. I think in the UK they're much better organized than with us. But it's very important to have your own institutions, your own mosques, your own schools, your own media, all like organizations that you can participate in a positive and constructive way, of course, but you can be yourself. That's the whole concept of a free and open society. And especially in the Netherlands it's strange because, like I told you, the reason we got independence was because of a religious thing. He wanted to have religious freedom because I don't want to be a Catholic if I don't want to. You can be if you want to, but I don't want to. And this whole idea is the fundament of the Netherlands, so it's kind of strange that especially the freedom of religion is so much under attack right now.
I think if anyone has any questions, I know we'll have a few minutes, inshallah. Someone, the lady,
Firstly, thank you for coming to Edinburgh and the fear, amazing technology, such an advanced and way to kind of share Islam and a first experience. So just thank you, and I hope you share that with us in the UK as well. And my question is, was there a defining moment when you thought Islam's for me? And I've got a second question, if you don't mind, sorry. What is it that people fear about Islam? Because obviously as a Muslim, being born into religion, you don't get what people really fear about us. So there's kind of two questions there.
Yeah, good questions. Well, the last one, what do people fear? I think that has, again, to do with secularism, because I once talked to my grandfather, and I was still very anti-Islam back then, but he said, well, if Muslims came in the 1920s, for example, to Europe, a lot of problems were no problems, because nowadays it's more about the moral issues, right? That this is wrong, you're backward, and it's ridiculous to see it like this. But those values back then, traditional family, for example, father and mother, children, believing in God, going to church or the mosque, all these things, dressing modest, no pornography on television, not using drugs, stuff like this. I think it's pretty normal, but nowadays it's almost like that's extreme. Whoa, you're a fanatic guy, you don't use drugs. And it's of course a joke, but it has to do with this shift that we've seen in the West. And because most of the people don't understand religion anymore and they don't have any empathy for it, that makes it tense. And I think that's a big problem. And when I look at from of course there's this, I had my theological objections against Islam because we said, well, it's a false religion, but it's a cultural thing as well. Because it's like, I shared the story of the croissant, and a lot of people perhaps know it. It's just an example of how deep anti-Islam vibes, in a way, are in the European culture. Now, I love the European culture and I feel very European, but there are some things in it that are historically very biased. And for example, it's the croissant, the sandwich, the French sandwich. In 1683, there was this Battle of Vienna, that's what they call it. It's the last big fight between the Ottoman Empire and the West, the Christians. And in Vienna, the Christians won. And you see how in extreme right, in the anti-Islam movement, it's very much there. We have, for example, a very famous website called The Gates of Vienna, the crazy guided terrorist who killed 50 children and men and women in Christchurch with his gun. He had written 1683 on his gun. And some people said, well, he was doing math or how many people he wanted to shoot. No. 1683 is the year of the last battle between the Ottoman Empire, so the Muslims and the Christians. So it's a real ideological thing that he did and what he wrote down. But I think that's a problem. And but when it comes to the croissant, in 1683, so the Christians won, and what they did, they took dough and they shaped it into a half moon in a crescent. That's why it's called croissant, crescent. And to break it and to show the people, well, we broke Islam, we broke the Muslims, now we ate it. And of course, it's not a call for the boycott of the croissant. I really love the croissant, I eat it every day. But it's just to show how deep this is in culture. Most of the people don't know it, but there's this cultural thing, of course. And the book that's here is from Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad. It's very interesting. He mentions a story about the first time that Europeans defined themselves as Europeans. And the oldest text we have, where there was another battle, the first big battle was in the year 732 in Poitiers in France. And there was this guy, I think in English he's called Charlemagne, and he stopped the invasion of the Muslims, so to say. And that was the first time that people fought against an invading force, so to say. And the people here the people back then, they made like a historical report of it. And a few decades after it, in year 754, they written down that we, the Europeans, those who are not Muslim, fought against blah blah blah. So the first time that in text they defined themselves, we as Europeans, was non-Muslim. So we as non-Muslims were fighting these Muslim guys, and it's not even about Christianity because a big part of Europe wasn't even Christian then. So it was just we, the non-Muslims, fighting the Muslims. And it's logical because in the beginning the north of Africa, of course, used to be Christian. You still see it, for example, in Egypt. The Coptic Christians, of course, they're still there. And in Turkey, the most important places there, from a Christian perspective, are mentioned in the Bible as well. Paul, the Apostle Paul, he writes several letters to Ephesians, for example, and other. And all these places are in Turkey. So Turkey used to be for a big part Christian. So this half moon almost around Europe was first Christian, and all of a sudden it became Muslim out of nothing. So the people said, "Whoa, what's this?" And that's something in culture, in the beginning, that's already there. Okay, those people are alien; they're not part of us. It's scared, etc. Then, of course, you have all this cultural stuff coming in, and the combination with terrorism, because that's real as well. Of course, people misbehaving, and the combination of these things makes people scared of Islam. Then is the first part.
I just mentioned this book since we're on it. Highly recommended. Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, one of our great intellectuals in the West. It's called Traveling Home. It's a collection of essays. It's not an easy read. I'm not but he goes into a lot of these things that we talk about, identity and offers a vision for the future of what Muslims can offer to these societies. We should be. One of the messages that come out of it that we should be healers and we should be helpers. We shouldn't be looking down upon the society, but rather helping people to progress and to solving the problems that this secularism and this liberalism has caused and will cause. We should be people that not just looking after our own interests as Muslims, but actually being there to serve the communities that we're in. And that's happening, inshallah. But there's some very interesting, discussions in there that he talks about. And the first question was.
Yeah. Well, and it's very interesting what you mentioned, because being, so to say, an example in a way, and it's not always that way, unfortunately. But there is really this. I call it the 3 Gs. And in the Netherlands we can say the 3 Gs, but if I translate it, they're not 3 Gs anymore. But the first one is that, as Muslims, of course, the central concept is the belief in Allah, in God, of course. So that's the first G in Dutch, the G of God. And then we have we call gezin, and that means family. So it's the second G, and then gemeenschap, a lot of G's, and it means community. So and like so to say, the feeling of being part of a community, act like you are part of a community and serve the community. And then of course family is very important. It's the smallest community, of course, in a bigger society, and the belief in God is the central element, the central concept. So this is something that the West lost, because individualism is the norm. You have to be an individual. We only look at you. Oh, don't care what other people think. You are special. You have your Instagrams, blah blah blah. So that's important. You are special, and there is no community. And of course, the belief in God declined, so up to a stage that over in the majority in my country already is an atheist. And of course, family is, you see like a family breakdown almost. It's not defined anymore that you have a father and a mother and a child. It's mixed now. You see a lot of divorces, etc. So it's very important that you bring that back. And I think Islam, although not always practiced by us as a community in the way it should be practiced, but we have the example. Peace and blessings be upon him. That's the teacher. That's what we should do and who we should follow. So it's important. But to come back to the question, sorry. The first part of the question was there a defining moment? Well, for me it was more like a development. It took me years. It was a process, yeah. But if there have to be a moment, I think that I mentioned it yesterday. At a certain point, I thought, well, I put away all the books. I got tired of it. I said, well, I don't feel like reading anymore, doing anything. So I put all the books on a shelf. And this sounds a little bit like a fairy tale, but it really happened. A few books fell from the shelf, and one of the books that fell from the shelf was the Quran. So I picked it up, and my hand was on the page where it was a translation, of course, because I couldn't read Arabic yet. Still not so very knowledge. But it was Surah 22. And in Surah 22 there is this ayat, I think it's 46 translated, and it says, it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts. And then I thought to myself, I really written down everything that I wanted to know. I made a comparison between Old Testament prophets with the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. I looked at his character, I looked at the history, I looked at the concepts of God in both religions. So I really wrote down what I wanted to be, and nobody forced me to write it down, but I still couldn't accept it. So I literally could see with my eyes, but I couldn't accept it in my heart because I thought, well, Muslims, Islam. But so that was my problem, and then I did like when I look back at it now, I did like a dua, of course, wasn't the dua, yeah. And I said, well, God, I don't care if it's a God of Christianity or Islam, just give me a sign or something that I know this is the truth. And of course, I didn't get any sign. But the next morning, I woke up and I felt very strong, and then I told my wife, well, I think I'll be a Muslim. and then
she was overjoyed.
She was overjoyed. No, the funny thing, my wife, the first thing my wife says, yeah, we have to put the dishes in the machine. and I said to her, did you hear what I say? Did you hear what I say? Yeah. So, well, what do you mean with, we have to, I tell you I will be Muslim, you say we have to put the dishes in the machine. And she said, well, if Islam is in your heart and that's the truth for you, I cannot do anything about it, that's your belief. And if you're still my husband and the father of our children, then we have to put the dishes in the machine. So she said, life goes on. So it was very sweet.
I think there's one lady over here. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, thank you so much for, for your talk. I've got sort of a double barrel question as well. I wanted to please ask if you had any experience of dealing with peaceful Muslims or knowledge of peaceful Muslims before you became Muslim, and also what was your experience of changing your friendship circles after you became Muslim, and if people, I imagine, were perhaps apprehensive, perhaps, of being your friends.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, no, it wasn't that all Muslims were scary in a personal sense. I met a lot of Muslims who were very friendly, but I felt sorry for them. I thought, well, you're a victim of your own ideology. So it wasn't that I never wanted to interact or engage with Muslims. So well, they didn't want to engage with me, of course. But there were some that were very friendly. But it was just that I thought, yeah, well, first in a theological sense you're lost, and then of course in an ideological sense you're also a danger. So it wasn't, even though people were friendly, and most of the time I thought, well, when they are friendly, they're not living up to their religion, otherwise they weren't friendly. So they were like half Muslims or wannabe Muslims. Yeah, and sorry, the second part was friendship. Yeah, well, yeah, of course, I lost some friends and old colleagues and other people that I thought were friends. But I have to say, my old school friends, the friends I already I knew for 25 years, they stayed. They said, well, of course we have to get used to the idea of you all of a sudden being a Muslim. Yeah, I talked them through. And well, they accepted. And one of them, he said, well, to me it's like, he's very much into football. And he said, well, it's just something, it's not done. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it's like when I was younger, there's this guy, Luis Figo. He went from Barcelona to Real Madrid. And he said, that's the feeling. I cannot explain it in a different way. You cannot, well, for here it's probably when you go from Glasgow to Celtic or the other way around. So he said, that's not done. But if you made your transfer, then you made it. So that's, yeah, so most of the people, my real friends stayed. Yeah, like I said in the beginning, some family members, friends, etc. not that they're gone and said I'm dead, etc. Yeah, that's something. I cannot help that, of course. And I have to be honest. In the beginning, I thought that everybody would hate me because I didn't know how Muslims would react. Because I thought, well, I said so many negative things about these people and about what's important and about religion and God, etc. So the Muslims certainly not going to like the fact that I became Muslim. Then, of course, I had my old friends, and I knew some of them were really crazy. I thought, well, I hope I survive. And of course, you have your family, and that's more the sad and the emotional part. So I thought, well, it's not going to be a very nice experience, the couple of months. And it wasn't too nice, but there were some lights. But yeah, of course, that's part of the deal. But I have to be honest that the Muslim community, from the liberal Muslims till the very conservative Muslims and everything in between, were very nice. There was nobody that said you cannot be a Muslim or that's a bad thing. Only ex-Muslims were very fanatic. They were really screaming like on the street when I walked by, "You traitor of the Enlightenment," and it's okay. But I never thought about the fact that there were ex-Muslims being angry or whatever. So yeah, that's the experience.
I think I've got maybe two more questions. Sure. This brother was yeah.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you so much for. The question is, do you agree with me that actually it's actually the West that actually created, that was the cause of terrorism that was happening like 9/11?
Okay. Well, first about racism. Of course, there are a lot of racist people, but it's not only, of course, something you see with European people. I've been around, and I was able, I'm very fortunate about that, to travel to different places and different communities. And yeah, I've experienced, and I was kind of shocked myself, that there is also a lot of racism inside the Muslim community, especially toward black people. And that's so it's not something that's only European or Western. It's unfortunately something that is a worldwide problem. And I think when you look at Islam, that's why I think Islam is so beautiful, and why the example of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is so extraordinary, that he is the only religious figure, not Buddha, not Jesus Christ, and all the other important persons that explicitly talked about racial issues. He said a non-Arab is not more important than an Arab, and an Arab is not more important, etc. So, and he's the only one that explicitly talked about that. So that is the example. But unfortunately, we see all around the world that there is a problem. So there's a special person called Ibn Khaldun. He's a great scientist from the 13th or 12th century, and he wrote a book. It's called the Muqaddimah. And I read the translation of the Muqaddimah, and in the Muqaddimah he mentions this concept. It's called Asabiyya. And perhaps I pronounce it in a wrong way. But Asabiyya it's like social solidarity. And he says that social solidarity is part of like almost the fitra in a biological sense. That people who look like you are the people who are nearest to you. That's why you love your children, etc. And he says, but there's another scale, and it's society, and then there's this even the empire scale. And he says, as long as people look like you, and not only biological, but also have the same ideology or religion, that makes you feel at home, and you feel attracted to them. And I thought when I was thinking about it, I think it's very, very true, because when you look at, for example, Ukrainian refugees now, right? Everybody's welcoming them, and they're almost giving money and balloons and stuff like that. But when Syrian refugees came, people said, "Go away, you're scary, I don't like you, terrorist, blah, blah, blah." And of course, that's ridiculous, and it's very much a form of hypocrisy, of course. But when I thought about it and I combined it with the concept of Asabiyya, I thought, I get the point. Because when we talk, for example, about Palestine, you feel emotion, right? You see the girls being killed by the Israeli army, occupation, etc. So you get emotional. But when we think about, for example, Tibet, China took the country, killed people, expelled them, took their whole culture, erased almost. And that's at the same time, it's 48, it's 46, 48. But I don't feel, and it's not that I don't like Tibetan people, but I don't feel the same emotion. Because they don't look like me, I don't have this relationship with them, we don't believe in the same God, etc. But of course that's a form of racism as well, because I'm very much into group A because they're near to me, and not group B. And that's something you see all over the world, and I think that is a big problem. And then the point, terrorism in the West. Yeah, of course the West did a lot of things that are unacceptable, and there's so much hypocrisy that's almost, cannot almost really tell a story. For example, the United States, and also Tony Blair from the UK, of course, he admitted that they lied about the weapons of mass destruction. But of course Iraq, where of course Saddam Hussein wasn't an angel either, of course, but the whole country was wrecked and there were hundreds and thousands of people killed because of a lie. And the fact that you admit it and don't give money or try to help or whatever, that makes it so hard. And of course if people then start being emotional or do crazy stuff or even try to offer themselves, sacrifice themselves in a way, of course it's understandable, and of course it has to do with the West. But the fact that they do stuff like that, I mean the people in power, the lying politicians, so to say, that they do things, that doesn't make it good for us, because we of course have another example. Our teacher, peace and blessing be upon him, didn't say, he did that, then I do that. No, that's not the way it works. So from a political and from a human perspective, I understand completely 101%, if that's something that's possible, 110. But from a religious perspective, of course, that's not how we should react. But of course, I know that's very different.
I think we'll end there, inshallah, like that. And we want to just to round things off, inshallah, on that note, a very positive note, in which he said that whatever is done to us as Muslims, there's no excuse. There's no excuse for us to commit crimes, and that was the essential message of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That whatever was thrown at him, whatever abuse and violence and whatever was thrown at him, he responded with what was beautiful. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is the essence of our deen, and the more that we can embody that, and that's our hope, inshallah, from these meetings. We can go on. Honestly, we could talk all day, and we can listen to questions all day from Joram, and inshallah he'll come again. But what we've heard is enough. What we've heard is enough to inspire us to be forces of good and forces of change, and use what means we have to try and represent Islam, and to try and be means of guidance, and to be healers, and to be a force of good in society. So Jazakumullah khair, Allah bless you. There's tea and coffee and stuff at the back. I'm just conscious he's on a very short time. He's very generously come on his day off to kind of. He wanted to do a bit of sightseeing and go out to sea and things, so he's already given us a lot of his time, so I want to just end it there, inshallah. But Jazakumullah khair, everyone, for joining us. Please, this is a record attendance in Edinburgh. If anyone who's arranged an event in Edinburgh, if you get like 10 people, you're happy. So alhamdulillah, we've got like a good, so please keep coming. We have a monthly seerah session. Every month we study the life of the Prophet ﷺ. I think there's nothing more important than going back to the life of the Prophet ﷺ, studying in detail. How did he deal with adversity? How did he deal with his enemies? So every next Sunday, inshallah, in Edinburgh Mosque, Dar al-Arqam, we have a seerah session at 3 o'clock for adults and children. We have other sessions as well. We have a New to Islam session here in this place for people who are interested in Islam and who are new to Islam. So please, get involved. I just want to say a big thank you to Joram and everyone that's attending. We'll just finish with a dua, inshallah. Please, please make a big dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses the efforts of our brother, increases him in certainty and light and iman, and guides his family. All those family members who are not Muslim, we ask Allah that they are guided to Islam. And all our other family members who are Muslim, we ask them to be guided to Islam. And our relatives and our colleagues and our friends and family and neighbors, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let them see the light of Islam, whether it be through us or whether it be through any other means, inshallah. Allah make us guides who guide others, not those who are astray, who send other people astray. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve the suffering of Ummah Sayyidina Muhammad, our brothers and sisters in difficulty in many places. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them ease and give them strong faith, and all those difficult places, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them relief, give them Allah mercy, those who have passed away, and shifa to those who are sick. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi, alhamdulillah, al-Fatiha.